Today, we're going to talk about a very important subject. In fact, it's one of the most important subjects in history, a discussion on who were the ancient Egyptians. No debate of history has caused more debate, more passion, more violent protest than the question of who were the ancient Egyptians. The reason why is because that everyone within the professional realm understands the role of Egypt and how much it played in the development of civilization. So this is why so many people have tried to paint Egypt in a certain way. For example, the ancient Egyptians, if you look at any movies today, you will see a particular model of the Egyptians. For example, think about any of the movies that you've ever seen that depicts ancient Egyptians. In fact, when you look at all the movies, they're all depicted as non-African. But yet, as we have learned, the ancient Egyptians are African people. So, today, when you look at the movies, this is what you see. And so much of what you see is what you believe. But if you ask somebody, you say, did you know that the ancient Egyptians are Black African people? They will quickly say, oh yeah, I knew that. But in reality, what actually tells you that the ancient Egyptians are Black African, you really couldn't say. Sometimes somebody might say, oh, Egypt is in Africa. Well, that is true, but that doesn't really explain who they were. The Egyptians could have been people who came from another place and settled down in Egypt. Massive migration. There are a number of reasons why the Egyptians can be another culture, even though they are living in Africa. No, we have to specifically identify who the ancient Egyptians were. Okay? The ancient Egyptians did not come from China. They did not come from England. They did not come from Mesopotamia. And they did not crash here from outer space. The ancient Egyptians are Black African people. And until 1962, we didn't really know where exactly the ancient Egyptian culture started. So that's what we're going to do first. We're going to say exactly where the Egyptians came from. The ancient Egyptians came from a place that today is identified as Sudan. Some people have called it Ethiopia. That's the modern Greek name. It's also called Nubia. That's what the ancient Egyptians called them. Nubia, from the Egyptian word nub, meaning gold. And we actually find the first evidence of Egyptian culture in the Sudan. In 1962, they discovered Cemetery L, and Cemetery L was discovered right before the flooding of the Aswan Dam. Cemetery L revealed a kingdom called Taseti. Taseti means the land of the bow. And this cemetery of 33 tombs revealed that there were 18 pharaohs. In other words, Egyptian culture is starting here, and they already had pharaohs. Now, this is about 200 years before Egypt starts. So, in the cemetery, we find 33 tombs, 18 pharaohs. We find all the symbols of the palace and the Egyptian symbols of power. We find the ritual boat that we will see later on in Egyptian culture. We even find the hieroglyphs already present in this cemetery. The ancient Egyptians, we can say definitively, came from Sudan. They came from Ethiopia, what the Bible calls Cush. The ancient Egyptians originate in what the Bible calls Cush. Now, we also have eyewitnesses. You see, during ancient times, there were many people to visit Egypt. And when they visited Egypt, they left a record and they said what they saw. And they record that the ancient Egyptians that they saw when they were there were Black African people. Herodotus, the official Greek historian, said that they, the Egyptians, had black skin and woolly hair. Diodorus of Sicily, Italy, he said that the Egyptians are colonists of Ethiopia and that Osiris is the one who established this new colony which became Egypt. We have many classical writers who say that when they visited Egypt, the people that they saw there inhabiting that land was Black African people. Now, we must take a moment out to also identify something. Egypt is not the name of the country. The people who lived there, of Pharaonic civilization, did not call their land Egypt. That's a Greek term coming very late in the history. The ancient Egyptians called their country Kemet. Kemet is actually a word that describes many things. The word Kemet means black, and not just any black, but coal black. It's represented as KMT, and when we add vowels to it, it becomes Kemet. Some people spell it Kemet, that's also correct. But the word itself, Kemet, comes from the Egyptian root Kam. Kam means black. Now, this is interesting because in the Bible, Noah's son is named Ham. The Hebrew word for Ham is the same as the Egyptian root Kam, which also means black. Now, in Psalms, it says that Egypt is the land of Ham. So once again, everywhere we look, even in the name of the country itself, we find that the word Kemet means black. In fact, the actual translation of Kemet is the black land. So if we are to actually remember that the people in Egypt are Black African people, then it becomes easy to interpret their civilization. Now, what did the Egyptians say about themselves? How did the Egyptians see themselves? Well, we have a record of that, okay? In the tomb of Ramses III, we have a picture of where the Egyptians depict themselves in contrast to other nations. And you can see that they understood and saw themselves as different. The picture you're seeing now is A is the Egyptian himself, and B would be the Greek or the Roman, the European. The C would be the Ethiopian, the Nubian, or the Cushite. And then D would be the Semitic, the Babylonian, the Canaanite. So now you have 4 different nations as understood by the ancient Egyptian. This is what you need to take away from this picture. When it came time for the Egyptians to depict themselves, they did not see themselves as similar, but they saw themselves identical as the Cushites. You will notice that A is the Egyptian and C is the Cushite. And the Egyptian, according to himself, saw himself as a black man. Well, we've also done some biological studies. We've gone into the tombs and into the graves, and we have recovered the human remains, and we have done an analysis of what we find of the bodies themselves. Shamata Kita, Oxford University, and a specialist in human remains. He also worked on the Human Genome Project. He did an analysis on the ancient Egyptian population, and he says that the ancient Egyptians are consistent with the people of the Nile Valley, which are, I guess a good term we might say is Ethiopian people. So the ancient Egyptians and the Cushites, or the Nubians, or the Ethiopians and the Egyptians are the same people. Egypt originates from them. So, we can be honest. All right. Come on, let's be honest. You've seen Egyptian art, and when you look at the Egyptians, they don't look like black folks. They really don't. Oh, we can be honest, they don't. In fact, the Egyptians have like a reddish brown color to them, all right? But once again, we cannot add or install or enforce or impose our values onto their text, okay? The Egyptians are not thinking in terms of writing. They're thinking in terms of theology. And by that definition, the color that's being used in Egyptian art does not reflect race. It's not a record. It's theology. And that red-brown color is a color that is used in theological context. Many times all around the African continent, we see this same red color being used. Remember we said that if you want to know something about Egypt, you can look to the rest of Africa. And if you want to know the rest of Africa, you can also look to Egypt on the fundamental level. Yes, the cultures are very, very different, but fundamentally, ontologically, the Egyptians and Africa in general are the same. And remember, it is Egypt who gives birth to the rest of Africa. So, if we want to understand this red color, this red-brown color that you see in all Egyptian art that has allowed other people to say that they're not black Africans, let's look at this red-brown color throughout the continent, and we find an abundance of the evidence for what that looks like. All around the continent, this red color is used in the theological context. Not just in one place, not just in two places, but around the continent, this red color is consistent. Here's a picture of a lady in Kenya. She's a bride. She's getting ready to get married. She's to the left. On the right is the maid of honor. The maid of honor is applying this red ochre paint to her face to prepare her for a wedding because red indicates purity. She is not trying to depict her race with this color. She's just trying to symbolize her purity. So the color that you see on Egyptian walls is not attempting to reflect race. See how our modern values are being imposed on the text? No. You have to look at it from the African Egyptian standpoint, and that is this red ochre paint is used for theology. And in other places, we just mentioned a bride. In other places, men are painted this way for rite of passage when they become manhood. In other places, it's royalty. A lot of times, this color is used to depict something theological. One last piece of evidence. Shakanta Diop developed a test. It's called a melanin dosage test. In this test, they can go into the skin and they can measure the level of melanin. In other words, how dark they were. And so Shakanta Diop was able to go into the museum and examine many of the mummies, especially from the Marietta excavation, and actually take melanin from the skin of the mummy and to measure the level of melanin. And Shakanta says very definitively that all of the mummies that he was able to examine had levels of melanin high enough to be classified only as Black African. Now he makes a special note about Ramses II. Remember Ramses II, the great Ramses? He noted that Ramses II's melanin was specifically high. And if you've ever seen Job, as you're seeing him, a picture of him here, he says that Ramses II's melanin level was so high that it rivaled his own. So Ramses II was not only a black man, he was a very dark-skinned black man. The ancient Egyptians were black African people. Now, interestingly enough, Egypt was invaded many times. But interestingly enough, even though Egypt was invaded many times, the invaders, for whatever reason, never made a whole lot of difference with their culture. In fact, most invaders adopted Egyptian culture. And so the racial composition of ancient Egypt remained black for most of its history. It is only during the time of the Greeks and the Romans that you see a significant mixing of the people. But for the most part, the ancient Egyptians were particularly homogeneous, especially among royalty. Last thing I want to say is that we have presented today many pieces of evidence that the ancient Egyptians are black African people, but it's going to take time to overcome the training that we have gone through in order to understand that the ancient Egyptians are black African people.